Back in 1290 BC, Thebes, the pharaoh had a strict rule that his wife Anck-Su-Namun is not to be touched by any other man but him. But his priest, Imhotep, had a secret relationship with her. He discovers that someone had been in contact with her, leading to her and Imhotep killing the pharaoh. Imhotep escapes with the help of his priests while Anck-Su-Namun offed herself rather than facing Pharaoh's guards, the Medjai. Since he is the only one who can resurrect her, Imhotep had to survive. Later, Imhotep went to Hamunaptra to take Anck-Su-Namun's body so that he could resurrect her using the ancient Book of the Dead. He fails as he was stopped before completing the ritual by the Medjai. Imhotep's priests were mummified alive while he was condemned to the Hamdai, the worst of all curses. For years, men fought over the land of Thebes, not knowing the evil that lied beneath it. The Medjai, descendants of the Pharaoh's guard, kept watch without intervening. In 1923, we are introduced to the protagonist of this masterpiece, Rick O'Connell, and the most dramatic ways people fall and die after getting shot. What are they fighting for? I don't know, gold maybe? So, Benny dips in the beginning of the fight. Rick follows later, but Benny enters a tomb and locks Rick out. Rick is cornered, but the Arab dudes suddenly dipped because they believed that the place Rick was standing on was extremely cursed. Rick decides to leave the place after the Medjai decide not to kill him, saying that the desert will. Cut to 1926 Cairo, where in some library we see Evelyn, who has to be the worst librarian ever. Her brother, Jonathan, comes in with a stolen antique puzzle box of some kind. It had a map in it, assumed to be a treasure map to Seti I's treasure. As they were observing the map, this man just burnt the map intentionally and pretended that it was an accident. And he specifically burnt the area that is said to have the treasure, Hamunaptra. It turns out that Rick has been imprisoned in some place in Cairo. And John stole the puzzle box from him. Rick says that he was in Hamunaptra and promises to take them there if they get him out. Rick is taken to be hanged, but Evie negotiates with the warden. She tells him that Rick knows of Hamunaptra and they'll share the treasure if they release Rick and find the treasure through his help. All this happens while Rick is still hanging. He must have a really strong neck. They come to an agreement and Rick is cut down. Rick is cleaned up and fresh when he comes to the docks to board the boat. The warden comes too. As they were traveling, they were followed by the Medjai. Rick has himself armed with enough weapons to kill like a lot of people. Rick notices Benny in the boat as well, and he says that he is leading some Americans to Hamunaptra as well. Rick tosses Benny into the river. While she was preparing herself to go to sleep, Evie is confronted by one of the Medjai who asks for the map and the puzzle box, which turns out to be some sort of key. Rick comes to save her and accidentally sets the place on fire, burning the map, but he reassures Evie that he knows where they were going and doesn't need the map. Rick shoots his way out. He and Evelyn jump into the river. John found the key and followed too. Benny and the Americans got out on the wrong side of the river, but they got all the horses. Rick and John get camels for transportation when they get to some village. Evie is looking smoking hot. John, Evie, Rick, and the warden begin their journey to Hamunaptra. Camels are pretty awesome. As they were on their journey, the Medjai spot them, and Rick sees them too. Talk about night vision. Benny and the Americans finally meet up with Rick and his team. As the sun rose, the city of Hamunaptra revealed itself and they began racing towards it. Benny begins to whoop Rick but is thrown off his camel by him. When they finally get there, they are led by Evie to work on their way into the temple by the Anubis statue, since she says it's just a portion of it and its legs are buried deep under the sand. They finally find a way into the temple. They meet up with Benny and his American crew and they agree to work in different parts of the temple at gunpoint. The warden sneaks off. As the Americans were opening up a compartment, they are warned by the Egyptologist and told to let the Arabic diggers open it. The diggers are hit with a pressurized acidic gas when they opened the compartment. A sarcophagus falls right in front of Rick and Evie as they were seated. The warden was scraping out some kind of blue pebbles from a wall, claiming that it was blue gold. What the hell is blue gold? The warden is dumber than I thought. It turns out that the pebbles were scarabs that were dormant. It entered his body through his leg and started crawling inside him. Before they could open the sarcophagus lock using the puzzle box, the warden passes running and screaming. He hit himself on a wall and died. Later, the Medjai ambushed them as they were resting. They engage in combat, but the Medjai leader, Ardeth, stops and tells them that there was no need for more bloodshed, but they must leave within a day. Rick's team and the Americans agree to join forces so as to get through the night. Eve gets drunk and when morning came, they continued to work in the tomb. The Americans found a chest that looked super cursed, and it even had inscriptions on it saying so. They still opened it up. What a bunch of idiots. Benny bolts away screaming. Rick and his team open up the sarcophagus to find a still decomposing mummy. The Americans find the ancient Book of the Dead and canopic jars holding what's left of Anck-Su-Namun. The Egyptologist attempts to open the book but fails since it requires a key. Evie later steals the book, opens it and reads it. Which isn't the smartest thing to do to a book that goes by the name Book of the Dead. The mummy comes to life. The Egyptologist gives the warning to not read the book a little too late. Suddenly, a swarm of locusts spawns out of nowhere and magically gobbles up the Arabic diggers. The rest escape into the tomb, but one of the Americans, Mr. Burns, falls and loses his glasses and Benny steps on them. He's now legally blind. I don't know if Benny stepped on the glasses accidentally or intentionally. I just don't understand this guy. Rick, John and Evie are chased by scarabs. Evie gets through some secret door and meets Mr. Burns, who had his eyes and tongue taken by the mummy. The mummy thinks that Evie is his long-lost love, Anck-Su-Namun. Rick comes to get her and shoots the mummy. As they were about to leave, the Medjai come with Mr. Burns as they rescued him before the mummy could finish him off. Ardeth tells Rick that the mummy is unkillable since it is not from the mortal plane. Benny encounters the mummy, and it spared him since he could be of use to it because he knows Hebrew. He is to lead him to the people who took the canopic jars. Later, Rick tells Evie that they should leave, but she says that they have to stay and find a way to stop Imhotep. Benny brings Imhotep to finish consuming Mr. Burns. The water and wine turn to blood and it begins to rain fire. Rick and Evie met Benny as they were going to Mr. Burns' room. When they get there, they find that the mummy had finished consuming Burns and is regenerating. Rick shoots Imhotep but he is unfazed, and he tosses Rick away. A cat shows up and the mummy. They go back to the library to find more information about Imhotep, but they meet Ardeth there too. It turns out that Ardeth and the library owner are part of a secret society that had been tasked to prevent the awakening of Imhotep. And also, they tell Evie that Imhotep had chosen her as a human sacrifice for the ritual of resurrecting Anck-Su-Namun. Rick locks Evie in a room and tells the two American men to keep watch as he and John go and rescue the Egyptologist. Rick and John find Benny trashing the Egyptologist's place and Rick interrogates him. Benny confesses that he was the one who brought Imhotep back from Hamunaptra. He also says that he was sent to look for the Book of the Dead by him.
My back!
Imhotep finds the Egyptologist, consumes him, took the Book of the Dead and one of the other canopic jars and then Imhotep finds and consumes one of the two remaining Americans and he's almost fully regenerated. He goes to the room where Evie is held but Rick scares him off with a cat. Later, a group of zombified locals gather at the library and they manage to break in. Evie discovers that the Book of Amun-Ra is at Hamunaptra inside the statue of Horus and might be the key to defeating Imhotep. The lot gets in a car to make their escape but Benny rats them out to Imhotep. What an ass! The zombified locals try to stop the car but they fight them off. Unfortunately, the remaining American dude with the last canopic jar falls from the car and is cornered. Imhotep finds him, consumes him and completes his regeneration. The lot is cornered, and Evie is taken by Imhotep. Benny takes the key from John. Imhotep orders them to be killed but they manage to escape through the sewers. the librarian stays and dies for no apparent reason. I mean, he had a lot of time to escape with the others, but he decided not to.
And I've decided that I want to die.
Rick, Ardeth, and John take a plane back to Hamunaptra. Imhotep transports himself, Benny and Evie in some kind of sand tornado. Imhotep spots the plane and sends a sand wave at it. The power of a boner came in full effect when Imhotep is distracted by Evie's kiss. The plane crashes anyway. Winston, the pilot, dies and is buried in quicksand. How did these two survive? They were literally outside on the plane's wings. Moving on, Imhotep, Benny and Evie make it into Hamunaptra. Rick, Ardeth, and John follow. John removes one of the dormant scarabs and it enters his skin. Rick manages to take it out and kill it. Imhotep summons his mummy priests, sends them to kill Rick, Ardeth, and John and awaken the rest of the priest crew. Rick, Ardeth, and John come across Seti's treasure cache but are met with Imhotep's mummy priests. They begin to shoot the mummies and the traitor Benny shows up there too. On the other hand, Evie is tied up next to Anck-Su-Namun ready for the resurrection ritual. They find the statue of Horus and blow the tomb shut while on the other hand Benny was stealing Seti's gold. Ardeth goes to fight the mummies while Rick and John find the Book of Amunra. Imhotep begins the resurrection ritual but as he was going to sacrifice Evie, John interrupts by shouting that he had found the Book of Amunra. Rick begins to chop mummies. He hit one so hard that it did the Michael Jackson spin. He manages to beat all the priest mummies. But as he and Evie were about to leave, the Medjai mummies came in and go after Rick. The resurrected Anck-Su-Namun went after Evie so as to complete the ritual. Rick fights the mummies, but they manage to pin him down. As they were about to kill him, John manages to finish reading the inscription in the Book of Amunra to control them. He commands them to go after Anck-Su-Namun, which they do. Imhotep goes for John, but Rick cuts off his arm. Imhotep tosses Rick away and just reattached his arm back, then he proceeded to give Rick a beating of his life. When he was about to finish off Rick, Evie read the Book of Amunra, and a ghost chariot came and took Imhotep's immortal soul, leaving him as immortal. Rick stabs him and he moonwalks into the pool of souls and dies, again. Benny went for another load of gold and accidentally placed one of the sacks on a lever as he was resting up. The place began shutting itself up. As they were running, John tripped and fell, losing the Book of Amunra. Benny doesn't make it out. As the light dimmed out, the scarabs surround him and... Yep, he's dead. John, Rick and Evie make it out as the whole place collapses. Ardeth also made it out. How? Plot armor. John, Rick, and Evie get on the camels and left with the gold that Benny had got out with first.
You like a little kissy wissy?
We don't do that here.